The Tipping Point: How Little Things Can Make a Big Difference by Malcolm Gladwell. Picture this. It's the mid-1990s, and there's this shoe brand called Hush Puppies. You know, those classic, comfortable brushed suede shoes your grandfather might have worn? Well, back then, they were basically extinct. Sales had crashed to a pathetic 30,000 pairs a year. Wolverine, the company behind them, was ready to pull the plug. These shoes were relics, gathering dust in small-town family stores. But then something weird happened. A couple of Wolverine executives were hanging out at a fashion shoot when a New York stylist dropped a bombshell. Hush Puppies were suddenly cool. Not at the mall, not in suburbia, but in the gritty clubs and dive bars of downtown Manhattan. Kids were raiding resale shops in Soho and the East Village, hunting down the last pairs like they were vintage treasures. The executives were completely baffled. This made zero sense. Isaac Mizrahi, one of the hottest fashion designers around, was apparently rocking them himself. Within a year, other designers were blowing up their phones, desperate to feature the shoes in runway shows. Pee Wee Herman himself walked into a new Hush Puppies boutique, while workers were still hammering shelves together, and grabbed a couple of pairs. In 1995, the company sold 430,000 pairs. The next year, 4 times that, and it kept climbing. A brand that was circling the drain suddenly became a cultural phenomenon, all because of a handful of kids in a few Manhattan blocks. How does that even happen? How does an idea, a product, or a behavior suddenly explode and spread like wildfire? And here's the flip side. How does a massive problem, like the crime wave that strangled New York City in the 1980s, suddenly evaporate, dropping by 2/3 in just 5 years? These mysteries captivated a brilliant young writer at The New Yorker named Malcolm Gladwell. In 2000, he published a book that completely changed how we understand the world. The Tipping Point became a global sensation, not just selling millions of copies, but giving us an entirely new vocabulary for understanding how change happens. Today, we're diving deep into its secrets. I want to show you the profound yet surprisingly simple rules that govern our world. By the time we're done, you won't just understand how trends explode. You'll grasp the hidden forces shaping your own life, and how you, armed with the right insights, can spark positive epidemics of your own. This isn't just about shoes or crime statistics. This is about understanding the very DNA of how our world actually works. So let's jump in. Have you ever really thought about how ideas actually spread? Not the big, flashy advertising campaigns, but the real, underground currents that shape what we buy, what we believe, and how we act. Gladwell's central idea is simple but mind-blowing. We should think about social change exactly like we think about viruses. Ideas, products, messages, behaviors, they all spread just like epidemics. They start small, they bubble under the surface for a while, and then, in one explosive moment, they hit what he calls the tipping point. That's when everything transforms all at once. The Hush Puppies story is a perfect example. So is New York's crime rate nosedive. They might seem totally unrelated, but Gladwell argues they share 3 common traits, 3 rules of epidemics. Master these 3 rules, and you've unlocked the secret to creating change. Here they are: the law of the few, the stickiness factor, and the power of context. Let's break them down, one by one. First, the law of the few. This is the idea that in any social epidemic, a tiny sliver of people do most of the heavy lifting. Economists have this rule, called the 80/20 principle. 80% of the work gets done by 20% of the people. In most societies, 20% of criminals commit 80% of the crime. 20% of beer drinkers guzzle 80% of the beer. But Gladwell argues that when it comes to spreading ideas, it's even more extreme. A very small group of special people are responsible for launching and spreading these social epidemics. To prove his point, he tells one of the most legendary stories in American history, Paul Revere's Midnight Ride. We all know the tale. On April 18, 1775, Paul Revere galloped through the Massachusetts countryside, warning colonists that the British were coming. He pounded on doors, alerted local leaders, and triggered a chain reaction of church bells and drumbeats that spread like a virus. By morning, the entire region was mobilized and ready to fight. It's the ultimate example of a word-of-mouth epidemic. But here's the twist most people don't know. That same night, another guy, a tanner named William Dawes, rode out with the exact same message. He covered just as much ground, passed through just as many towns. But his ride was a complete flop. The towns he warned didn't wake up. Local militias weren't mobilized. In fact, so few men from one of Dawes's towns showed up to fight that historians assumed it must have been a pro-British town. It wasn't. They just never got the message. So what made the difference? The message was identical. The urgency was identical. The difference, Gladwell argues, was the messenger. Paul Revere was a very special kind of person. He was what Gladwell calls a connector. Connectors are those people who seem to know everybody. They're the social glue holding society together. They have this uncanny gift for bringing the world together. Think about your own social circle. If you traced back how you met each friend, you'd probably find that a handful of key people introduced you to almost everyone you know. They're the hubs in our social network. Paul Revere was the ultimate connector of his era. He was intensely social, involved in countless clubs and committees. When Boston needed streetlights, Revere was on the committee. When the city market needed regulation, Revere was the clerk. He was a fisherman, a card player, a theater enthusiast. He knew everyone, from dock workers to political elites. So when he rode through the countryside that night, he wasn't just shouting into the darkness. He knew exactly whose door to knock on. He knew the local leaders, the militia captains, the key players in every town. And they knew him. They trusted him. William Dawes, by contrast, was just an ordinary guy. Probably a fine patriot, but once he left his hometown, he was just another stranger in the night. He didn't have that vast social network to amplify his message. Gladwell says connectors are one of three types of people who make up the law of the few. The other two are mavens and salesmen. Mavens are the information specialists. The word comes from Yiddish and means one who accumulates knowledge. These are the people we turn to for new information. They're the ones reading consumer reports, knowing the best deal on a car, telling you which new restaurant is worth your time. But a maven isn't just an expert. A maven is a teacher, a helper. They're passionate about sharing what they know, not to show off, but because they genuinely want to help you. Gladwell introduces us to Mark Alpert, a professor who's the ultimate maven. Alpert can tell you the best coffee price from 10 years ago, the exact way to score a discount hotel room in New York, and the pros and cons of every car on the market. His motivation isn't selfish. It's a deep desire to solve other people's problems. When a maven recommends something, you listen. Why? Because their advice is pure. They're not trying to sell you anything. They're trying to help you. Paul Revere was also a maven. He wasn't just socially connected. He was part of a secret intelligence group gathering information on the British. He knew what was happening and who needed to know. The third type is the salesman. These are the persuaders, people with the charisma and charm to make you believe what they're saying. They have this mysterious ability to draw you into their rhythm, to build instant trust and connection. Gladwell introduces us to Tom Gow, a financial planner so mesmerizing he could probably sell ice to penguins. But what makes someone like Gow so persuasive? It's not just logical arguments. It's the subtle stuff, the non-verbal cues. Gladwell points to fascinating psychological studies. In one, viewers who watched ABC News anchor Peter Jennings were more likely to vote for Ronald Reagan because Jennings, perhaps unconsciously, smiled more when discussing Reagan. That smile was a subtle, persuasive signal. In another study, students told to nod their heads up and down while listening to a radio editorial found it far more persuasive than students told to shake their heads side to side. Great salesmen are masters of these tiny cues. They're emotionally contagious. When they're happy, you feel happy. Their enthusiasm is infectious. They pull you into a kind of dance, a rhythm of conversation and movement that makes you want to agree with them. So the law of the few tells us that for an idea to tip, it needs the right messengers. Connectors spread the message, Mavens provide the message, and salesmen persuade us it's worth listening to. Those downtown kids who started the Hush Puppies trend? They were the innovators. But the trend didn't explode until connectors spread it across social circles. Mavens recognized it as authentic and cool, and salesmen made it appealing to everyone else. These people are translators, taking an idea from a small niche world and making it understandable and attractive to the masses. But having the right messenger is only part of the equation. The message itself has to be special. This brings us to Gladwell's second rule, the stickiness factor. The stickiness factor. Stickiness is what makes a message memorable. It's what makes it lodge in your brain. We're bombarded with thousands of messages daily. Most of them evaporate instantly. But a sticky message, you can't shake it. Winston tastes good like a cigarette should. That slogan, with its slightly improper grammar, was so unusual in the 1950s that people couldn't stop talking about it. It created a sensation. It was sticky. Where's the beef? From those old Wendy's commercials. Super sticky. Gladwell argues we often think making something memorable requires shouting, repetition, and a massive budget. But often, the secret to stickiness is a small, simple, but clever twist. The greatest example, the story of Sesame Street. In the late 1960s, a television producer named Joan Gans Cooney had an audacious vision. She wanted to harness television's power to start a literacy epidemic among preschoolers, especially disadvantaged kids. At the time, this was radical. Television was considered a low-involvement medium, entertaining but not educational. Real teaching was interactive and personal. How could a TV show ever effectively teach? The Sesame Street creators tackled this challenge with almost scientific precision. Their breakthrough insight: if you can hold children's attention, you can educate them. And they realized kids don't watch TV like zombies, just staring at bright lights and funny noises. They watch when they understand, and look away when confused. So the producers hired psychologist Ed Palmer to figure out what held kids' attention. Palmer invented a brilliant tool called the distractor. He'd bring preschoolers into a room and show them Sesame Street on a TV monitor. But right next to the TV, he'd project a slideshow of interesting pictures, changing slides every 7.5 seconds. By tracking when kids watched the show versus the slides, Palmer could create a second-by-second attention map. What he discovered was revolutionary. Kids didn't like long segments. 3 to 4 minutes was optimal. They didn't like watching adults argue. The confusion made them tune out. Everyone assumed kids would love watching live animals, but the distractor showed animal segments bombed every time. But Palmer's most important discovery came just before launch. The original plan kept fantasy elements, the Muppets, separate from the real street scenes with human actors. Child psychologists insisted mixing fantasy and reality would confuse children, but when Palmer tested pilot episodes, kids were riveted by Muppets. Then, their attention plummeted during street scenes with just adults. The street was supposed to be the show's glue, but it was boring kids senseless. With weeks before airtime, the producers made a desperate decision. They defied the experts and mixed fantasy with reality. They created new Muppets like Big Bird and Oscar the Grouch, who could walk and talk with human cast members on the street. With that one change, they found the magic formula. The artful blend of fluffy monsters and earnest adults became Sesame Street's essence, born from a desperate attempt to make the show sticky. But the story doesn't end there. Years later, a new children's show called Blue's Clues came along and became even stickier than Sesame Street. How? By taking stickiness lessons even deeper. Blue's Clues creators realized preschoolers think in narratives. They organize their world through stories. So instead of Sesame Street's fast-paced magazine-style format with dozens of short, disconnected segments, each Blue's Clues episode is a single, half-hour story. The host, Steve, presents a puzzle, and the audience helps find clues to solve it. The show is also incredibly literal. No clever puns or adult jokes that might confuse a 4-year-old. A character that's a mailbox is named Mailbox. A shovel and a pail are called Shovel and Pail. It might bore adults, but to a child it's perfectly clear. And Blue's Clues embraced another stickiness key: repetition. The creators noticed what they called the James Earl Jones effect. On Sesame Street, there was a segment where actor James Earl Jones recited the alphabet, with long pauses between letters. The first time kids watched, they'd shout out the letter after Jones. After a few viewings, they'd shout it during the pause. With enough repetition, they'd anticipate the letter before it even appeared. For children, repetition isn't boring, it's empowering. Each viewing deepens their understanding, letting them predict what happens and feel mastery. So Blue's Clues did something unprecedented. They aired the same episode 5 days straight, Monday through Friday. Research showed kids' attention and comprehension actually increased throughout the week. The lessons from Sesame Street and Blue's Clues are profound. Stickiness isn't about being loud or flashy. It's about understanding your audience and making small, critical adjustments to structure and presentation to make your message memorable and irresistible. This brings us to Gladwell's third and final rule: the power of context. The power of context. This is the idea that humans are exquisitely sensitive to their environment. Our behavior isn't just about our character. It's about the situation we're in. Minor changes in our immediate surroundings can massively impact how we act. The most powerful illustration? The story of New York City's crime epidemic. As I mentioned, in the 1980s, the city was a disaster. The subways were especially chaotic. Every car was plastered with graffiti, top to bottom. Fare beating was rampant. The system was filthy, unreliable, and dangerous. Bernhard Goetz, the subway vigilante, who shot 4 young men trying to mug him in 1984, became a folk hero because he seemed to embody a response to this overwhelming disorder. Then, in the early 1990s, the crime rate tipped. It didn't just decline, it crashed. How? The usual explanations: better economy, end of the crack epidemic, aging population, don't fully explain the speed and scale of New York's transformation. Gladwell argues the answer lies in a theory called broken windows. This theory, developed by criminologists James Q. Wilson and George Kelling, says crime is the inevitable result of disorder. If a building has a broken window that's left unrepaired, people conclude no one cares and no one's in charge. Soon, more windows break, and anarchy spreads, signaling that anything goes. Graffiti, public disorder, and aggressive panhandling are all equivalent to broken windows. They're invitations to more serious crime. In the mid-1980s, the New York Transit Authority, following Kelling's advice, decided to test this theory. The new subway director, David Gunn, did something that seemed insane at the time. With the system collapsing, he decided to focus on graffiti. He saw it as symbolic of the system's decay. He launched a relentless campaign to clean every single subway car. Once a car was cleaned, it would never be vandalized again. Cleaning crews would actually wait for graffiti artists to finish their elaborate 3-day murals, then immediately paint over them with rollers, right in front of the artists. The message was crystal clear: your work will never see daylight. By 1990, the graffiti was gone. Then a new police chief, William Bratton, took over transit police. He too believed in broken windows. With felonies at an all-time high, what did he focus on? Fare beating. He believed the 170,000 people daily jumping turnstiles were sending the same disorder signal as graffiti. He stationed plainclothes officers at turnstiles and started arresting fare beaters by the dozens. And they discovered something interesting. 1 in 7 arrested had an outstanding warrant for a more serious crime, and 1 in 20 was carrying a weapon. By cracking down on small stuff, they started impacting the big stuff. When Rudolph Giuliani became mayor, he made Bratton NYPD chief, and they applied the same strategy citywide, cracking down on quality-of-life crimes like public urination and the squeegee men harassing drivers. And the crime rate fell off a cliff. The power of context says that the behavior of Goetz and those 4 youths wasn't just about their personal issues. It was about the message sent by that graffiti-covered car, the filthy platform, and the system's general disorder. Change the context. Change the behavior. This idea is so powerful because it challenges our most fundamental beliefs about human nature. We tend to believe character is destiny. We make what psychologists call the fundamental attribution error. We overestimate character's importance and underestimate the situation's impact. Gladwell points to the famous Stanford prison experiment, where normal, healthy college students assigned as guards in a mock prison quickly became cruel and sadistic. Their environment overwhelmed their personalities. He also tells the story of the Good Samaritan experiment, where Princeton seminary students walked across campus to give a talk. Along the way, they passed a man slumped in an alley, clearly distressed. Who stopped to help? It had nothing to do with religious convictions. It didn't even matter that half were about to give a talk on the Good Samaritan parable. The only thing that mattered was whether they were in a hurry. Of those told they were late, only 10% stopped. Of those with time to spare, 63% stopped. A simple phrase, "Oh, you're late," was powerful enough to turn a compassionate person indifferent. That's the power of context. And context isn't just about physical environment. It's also about social environment, specifically the size of groups we're in. British anthropologist Robin Dunbar discovered there's a limit to how many people we can maintain stable social relationships with. By studying primate neocortex size, he developed an equation predicting maximum group size for any species. For humans, that number is about 150. Dunbar calls this the rule of 150, It's the number of people you wouldn't feel embarrassed joining for a drink if you bumped into them at a bar. It's the size of hunter-gatherer villages, of military companies, of communities that function effectively through informal personal loyalties. One company built its entire philosophy around this rule, Gore Associates, makers of Gore-Tex. It's a huge billion-dollar company, but it operates like a collection of small startups. Whenever a plant or division approaches 150 people, they split it in two. They found that in groups smaller than 150, peer pressure and personal relationships are far more effective at maintaining order and encouraging innovation than formal management. Everyone knows everyone, creating powerful community and shared purpose. The rule of 150 tells us that if we want to start an epidemic, if we want an idea to spread and stick within a group, we have to keep groups small. The book clubs that helped divine secrets of the Yaya sisterhood take off, the religious societies John Wesley used to spread Methodism, they were all small, intimate groups where new ideas could be nurtured and amplified. So let's connect it all. To create a tipping point, you need the law of the few, the right messengers. You need the stickiness factor, a message that's memorable and moves people to action. And you need the power of context, the right environment for that message to flourish. Gladwell shows how these rules apply to everything, even something as complex and tragic as teenage smoking. Why do teens smoke? Not because they don't know the risks. They actually overestimate them. They smoke because of the law of the few. They're given permission by cool kids, the rebellious, risk-taking salesmen of the adolescent world. Smoking isn't cool. Smokers are cool. The habit is contagious because the people doing it are compelling. And why does it stick? Not for everyone. Only about a third of teens who experiment with cigarettes become regular smokers. Gladwell explains there seems to be an addiction threshold. You can smoke up to about 5 cigarettes daily, the chipper level, without getting hooked. But cross that line, and the habit becomes incredibly sticky. And that stickiness often links to other factors, like genetics and a surprising connection to depression. Many heavy smokers, it turns out, unconsciously use nicotine to self-medicate. So how do you fight it? Attacking contagion is tough. You can't easily stop cool kids from being cool. And adult propaganda often backfires. But what if you attack stickiness? What if you created a safer cigarette with nicotine levels below the addiction threshold? Teens could still experiment, as they always will, but the habit wouldn't stick. Or what if you treated the underlying depression that makes nicotine so sticky for many smokers? This is what the drug Zyban does, and it's been remarkably effective. This is the genius of the tipping point. It reframes our problems and reveals that solutions often aren't where we think. They're not in massive, comprehensive programs, but in small, focused, intelligent changes. As we wrap up our journey through the tipping point, I keep coming back to that core, hopeful idea. The world isn't as immovable as it seems. We often look at big problems in our communities, in our own lives, and feel overwhelmed. We think the only way to make a difference requires massive amounts of money, effort, and time. But what Malcolm Gladwell teaches us is that this just isn't true. The world is a complex system, but it operates on a few simple, elegant rules. Change doesn't happen gradually. It happens in one dramatic moment, at the tipping point. And that tipping point can be reached with a surprisingly small push. The first profound lesson for me is the power of focus. We live in a world that tells us to do more, reach more people, scale up relentlessly. Gladwell says the opposite. He tells us to focus our resources on a few key areas. If you want to start a word-of-mouth epidemic, don't shout your message to everyone. Find your connectors, your Mavens, and your Salesmen. Give them the tools, the story, the passion, and let them do the work. The solution isn't reaching everyone, it's reaching the right people. The second lesson is that the world is often counterintuitive. We think to make a message stick, we have to make it louder and more complex. But Blue's Clues creators made their show slower, simpler, and more literal, and it became stickier than anything before. We think to stop crime, we have to solve deep underlying problems of poverty and inequality. But New York City leaders discovered that scrubbing graffiti and arresting fare beaters could have an even more immediate and dramatic effect. This teaches us humility. It tells us we have to test our assumptions, experiment, and be willing to accept that answers might come from the most unexpected places. And the final, perhaps most important lesson is a deep belief in the possibility of change. The power of context is radical. It says who we are isn't set in stone. We're not just prisoners of our genes or upbringing. We're powerfully influenced by our immediate surroundings, by the people around us, and by subtle environmental cues. A clean subway can make us better citizens. A small group can make us more collaborative. A rushed schedule can make us less compassionate. This isn't a pessimistic view of human nature. It's incredibly optimistic. It means change is possible. It means we can become better versions of ourselves by changing the details of our world. We don't have to solve huge, intractable problems to make a difference. We can fix the broken windows. We can find the beauty salons. We can give people a map to the health clinic. So what can you do with this knowledge right now? First, think about an idea or project you care about. Who are the connectors, mavens, and salesmen in your life who could help? Don't think about status or titles. Think about who people listen to, who they trust, who they're drawn to. Find those people and start a conversation. Second, look at the message you're trying to send. Is it sticky? Is it simple, memorable, and personal? Could you change one small thing about how you present it to make it more impactful? And finally, look at your own context. What are the broken windows in your environment? The little things sending the wrong message and holding you back. What small, tangible changes could you make to your surroundings that would make it easier for you and those around you to be the people you want to be? Because that's the ultimate promise of the tipping point. It's a reaffirmation that one intelligent, focused person can make a huge difference. The world may seem immovable and implacable, but it's not. With the slightest push, in just the right place, it can be tipped. We've explored the core ideas of The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell today, and I hope it sparked something in you. But a summary like this is really just a map. The real treasure comes from taking the journey yourself. The book is packed with so many more fascinating stories, deeper insights, and moments of discovery we couldn't cover. If anything we've discussed today has made you curious, if it's made you look at the world a little differently, then I truly encourage you to grab a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning new ideas. It's an experience that can fundamentally change how you see the connections and possibilities all around you. You can find a link to the book in the description below. Also, if you found this summary valuable, and you'd like to keep exploring ideas from the world's most impactful books, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. It tells us we're on the right track and ensures you won't miss our next journey into another life-changing book. Let's keep learning and growing together.